the idea of teaching. I mean, a lot of your essays in the book revolve around the family and um, fatherhood. Maybe you can share a little bit about like what was the inspiration and the motivation to write about that more specifically, and like how have you found that process of trying to, share your appreciation and love of nature to the next generation in your family?
Sure. I haven't thought about it too much about teaching as a concept, but of course we're always teaching and we're always learning in everything we do. I will say that I love higher ed. I mean, I work in higher ed now. I have a graduate degree in urban regional planning, which certainly informs a lot of the essays and how we build community. And speaking of economics, even economic development and how we redevelop, let's say, sustainable suburban downtowns, for example. Um, but I guess the answer to your question, Aaron, is, I spent a lot of time out in the woods as a kid, growing up in Central Florida. Well, even Tucson before that, and that certainly informed what I'm interested in and what I wanted to pursue. I had not the greatest relationship with my father, so when we had our own kids, I wanted to do the two things, I guess that my father and I didn't do, unfortunately, which is spend time together outside. And it's hard not to do that, frankly, here in Tucson or sort of anywhere we are. We're grew up on the road trip and big fans of the road trip. So I always took my daughters to various national parks. We drove across the country several times, and that's kind of informed my thinking. And then I guess writing about my daughters wasn't something I had initially planned to do. I'm a big fan of writers like David Quammen who do braided essays, but they have lots of personality, but they're not necessarily about the writer. They're not first person essays. But I did a graduate program in creative writing here at the University of Arizona, and in sharing my writing, it was certainly the essays about my daughters that got the most positive response. And so those are largely, but not solely, what fills Satellite.
That is some of the interesting territory for this type of writing, um, kind of layering that personal experience along with the more like the cultural message or kind of engaging with either its contemporary culture or historical context or something like that. Um, so yeah, like I guess like Kat, maybe you can consider that for a second, like in your personal narrative approach, and your book is, organized like chronologically, so it does fit into it's easy to read as a narrative in one sense. Um, how aware were you, or like how deliberate were you with like connecting to these different um, larger contexts, whether it's like, yeah, cultural, um, natural, historical, anything like that?
Well, at first I was just writing. I mean, that's I just write and I usually write essays. I don't have the ability, I guess, to conceive of a whole book, like it's in pieces. It's though I write, piecework and then I put it together. For example, I wrote an essay called In the Rut that Simmons published in terrain.org, and it was an essay, definitely was an essay. And then but I wanted it in the book as a chapter, and so then, I added to it and I changed some things. I mean, if Simmons reads it now, he would recognize it. It's still the same basic piece, but so I just had pieces and I started putting them together, and then you have to because it is a narrative, that I had to do some transitions, and and then clearly, and I'm writing about the same place, and so or my son, I don't have to say my elder son Ken every time I mention him, by people are going to know who he is pretty early. I don't know if I'm answering your question at all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, I've been I'm older than you both, so my first I when I started I guess my degree at Northern Arizona University, creative nonfiction or literary nonfiction wasn't considered a genre. I mean, there was nonfiction, which was your more, the kind that you don't add yourself to. But I wrote what was then called personal essays. Um, and that's what I've always done. I got that degree, and 25 years later, I went to the Institute of American Indian Arts and then got a degree. So one was a master's in creative writing, and the next was an MFA in creative nonfiction specifically. And it was really interesting to see the curve, what had happened and how. And then actually the focus was so much on memoir. I kept saying, I'm not a memoirist, and then apparently I've written two memoirs, which I didn't mean to do, but they're really, the essay and the personal essay was kind of just what I was doing, and then I worked them together.
And Aaron, if you
Yeah,
don't mind jumping in here,
absolutely.
the question of sort of the narrative arc for creative nonfiction as a book is a really interesting one, and it's changed, I feel like, in the last 10 or 12 years pretty radically. I remember having a conversation with Scott Russell Sanders, who's a wonderful essayist out of Indiana, about 10 or maybe even 15 years ago now. And he was lamenting how he was having difficulty finding a publisher for a book of essays. And we're talking about one of the best place-based essayists of all time, in my opinion. And that really made me sad because around that time I was working on what was in effect this same book, but an early version of it. And I was thinking, okay, well, I'm going to have to change these essays, do a lot like what Kat just said, which is kind of turn them into a more narrative, connected piece. But I think that's changed. And one of the books that helped me realize how that's changed, I mean, the market's changed, but also the press's willingness to publish more disparate essay collections, was a book published during or maybe just after the pandemic by John Price. It was published by University of Iowa Press called All Is Leaf. And I know John, he's a terrain.org contributor as well. He teaches at University of Nebraska Omaha, a really terrific place-based writer, writes a lot about the prairie as well as about raising his sons. And that book has a lot of different types of essays as well, from very narrative to lyrical to experimental. And for whatever reason, that gave me license to say, hey, you know what? I can include some of these essays that originally I wasn't going to include in Satellite. And then, of course, when the publisher agreed, that was great news. So I think we're in a time where nonfiction is such a wide spectrum and accepted as such. And that's a really beautiful thing. So it doesn't have to be a memoir. We don't have to be pigeonholed in that, or it doesn't have to be, a biopic of somebody else. It can be personal essays, it can be lyrical essays, it can be long form journalism, it can be all of those combined. And that I think is as a reader of essays and a lover of essays, I think that's great.